Hey everyone. I never thought I'd end up writing something like this. My name is Alex, I'm 34, and I thought I had a solid, happy marriage with my wife, Rachel. We've been together for 10 years, and we have an 8-year-old son, Tyler, who's the light of my life. But last Friday, everything I thought I knew about my marriage shattered in an instant. It started like any other day. Work had been a bit of a grind, so I decided to stop by a local bar on my way home to decompress. It wasn't something I usually did, but I figured one drink wouldn't hurt. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a familiar figure out of the corner of my eye. Rachel. At first, I thought I was mistaken. What would Rachel be doing here? She had told me she was meeting a friend for dinner downtown, but as I watched, I realized it was her. And she wasn't alone. A tall, muscular guy in his late 30s was with her. They were laughing, and his hand was casually resting on her lower back in a way that immediately set me on edge. I froze in my car, staring as they walked toward the entrance of the bar. My stomach churned. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but deep down, I knew better. I decided to follow them inside. The bar was dimly lit, with music playing just loud enough to mask most conversations. I spotted Rachel and the guy, let's call him Brad, seated at a small table in the corner. They looked cozy, too cozy. She leaned in close to him, her face lit up with laughter, the kind of laugh she used to share with me. I felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, anger, disbelief. Part of me wanted to storm over and confront them right then and there, but I held back. I needed to see more. I needed to know exactly what was going on before I acted. I found a spot at the bar where I could keep an eye on them without being noticed. Every laugh, every touch, every glance they exchanged felt like a knife to my chest. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did Tyler know anything? Did our friends? After about 20 minutes, they stood up and started heading toward the door. I followed them out, my heart pounding in my chest. On the parking lot pavement under the dim glow of the streetlights, I finally worked up the courage to confront them. Rachel, I called out, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She turned around, her face going pale as she saw me. Brad, on the other hand, looked completely unfazed. He smirked and walked toward me with a cocky swagger that made my blood boil. You must be Alex, he said, stopping just a few feet away. Then, to my absolute shock, he patted me on the shoulder like we were old friends. She's with me now, buddy. You should just accept it and move on. That was it. That was the moment I lost all control. Before I even realized what I was doing, my fist connected with his face. He staggered back, more stunned than hurt, and then I grabbed his arm and twisted. The sound of his bones snapping echoed in the quiet parking lot. Rachel screamed, Alex, stop. Don't do this. But I couldn't stop. I'd spent years being the nice guy, the one who worked hard to provide, who put my family first. And here she was, throwing it all away for him. Brad crumpled to the ground, clutching his arm and groaning in pain. Rachel rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. What is wrong with you? She shouted at me. What's wrong with me? I shot back, my voice shaking with rage. What's wrong with you, Rachel? Do you have any idea what you've done? She didn't answer. Instead, she helped Brad to his feet and shot me a look of pure venom. You've ruined everything, she hissed. I stood there, watching as they got into Brad's car and sped off into the night. My hands were shaking, and my heart felt like it was going to explode. I didn't know what to do, where to go. All I knew was that my life would never be the same. But this was just the beginning. The fallout from that night was far worse than anything I could have imagined. I stood there in the empty parking lot long after Brad's car had disappeared into the night, my hands still trembling, my breath shallow and uneven. My mind was racing, replaying every second of what just happened. The words he said, the way Rachel looked at me with anger instead of shame, and the sound of his arm breaking. It all swirled in my head like a storm I couldn't escape. I finally got back in my car, but I didn't drive home. I couldn't. I didn't know what I'd find there, or if I even wanted to find out. Instead, I drove aimlessly around the city, the streetlights blurring into long streaks of light through the windshield. My phone buzzed repeatedly in the cup holder, but I ignored it. I already knew it was Rachel. About an hour later, I pulled into a small park. The place was quiet, deserted except for the distant sound of crickets chirping. I sat on a bench, staring up at the night sky, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. 10 years. 10 years of marriage, of building a life together, raising Tyler, creating memories, and now it felt like none of it was real. My mind kept going back to the way Rachel had looked at Brad. That laugh, that sparkle in her eyes. It wasn't for me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time, I realized. How had I not noticed? Was I so caught up in work, in trying to be the perfect husband and father, that I missed the signs? I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in thought, but eventually, I forced myself to check my phone. There were 6 missed calls from Rachel and 3 text messages. We need to talk. Please don't do anything stupid. Alex, I'm sorry. I'll explain everything. Just come home. You're making this worse than it needs to be. Call me. I stared at the screen, feeling a wave of bitterness wash over me. I'm making this worse? I thought. Was she serious? How could she even think that after what she'd done? Despite my anger, I knew I had to go home eventually. Tyler was there, and he didn't deserve to get caught in the middle of this mess. Whatever was going on between Rachel and me, I owed it to him to keep things as normal as possible, for now. When I finally walked through the front door, the house was eerily quiet. Normally, Rachel would be waiting in the living room, scrolling through her phone or watching one of her shows. But tonight the lights were off, and the air felt heavy. I checked on Tyler first. He was sound asleep, clutching the stuffed dinosaur I'd bought him on his last birthday. As I closed his door, I heard movement behind me. I turned to see Rachel standing at the end of the hallway, her arms crossed, her face a mix of anger and, was it guilt? It was hard to tell. We need to talk, she said, her voice low but firm. I walked past her into the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and sat down at the table. Fine, I said, my voice colder than I intended. Start talking. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down across from me. Look, Alex, I'm sorry you had to find out like this, she began. Find out what exactly? I snapped. That my wife has been sneaking around with some guy behind my back? That she's been lying to me, to Tyler, to everyone? It's not that simple, she said, avoiding my eyes. Then explain it to me, I said, leaning forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems pretty damn simple. She sighed and ran a hand through her hair. I didn't mean for this to happen. Brad and it just kind of happened. It just happened? Are you kidding me? I slammed my hand on the table, making her flinch. You don't accidentally end up holding hands and laughing with some guy at a bar, Rachel. You don't just happen to destroy a family. Her eyes finally met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse. But then she straightened up, her expression hardening. You're not perfect either, Alex. You've been so busy with work, so focused on everything else, that you barely even noticed me anymore. I felt invisible for years. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. Was she right? Had I been so caught up in providing for our family that I'd neglected her? But no, this wasn't my fault. Whatever issues we had, this wasn't the way to handle them. So that's your excuse? I finally said. You felt invisible, so you decided to screw around with the first guy who paid attention to you? It wasn't like that, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I shook my head, my anger boiling over again. You know what, Rachel? I don't care anymore. You made your choice, and now you're going to have to live with it. I stood up and started to walk away, but she grabbed my arm. Alex, wait, she said, her voice cracking. Please don't do anything drastic. Think about Tyler. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. You should have thought about Tyler before you did this, I said, pulling away from her grip. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I was going to explain any of this to my son. But the worst part was, deep down, I knew this was far from over. The next morning, the tension in the house was suffocating. I barely slept on the couch, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Rachel hadn't tried to speak to me again after last night. When I got up, she was already in the kitchen, making breakfast for Tyler as if nothing had happened. "Daddy!" Tyler's face lit up as he saw me, and for a brief moment, his excitement reminded me why I couldn't let this situation destroy him. "Morning, champ," I said, forcing a smile as I ruffled his hair. Rachel glanced at me but didn't say a word. Her silence was deafening, but I wasn't ready to have another conversation with her, not in front of Tyler. I sat down at the table, pretending to focus on my coffee while my thoughts churned. Tyler chatted away about his school project, completely unaware of the storm brewing between his parents. I nodded and smiled, doing my best to act normal, but Rachel's avoidance was impossible to ignore. She barely looked at me, and when she did, her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Shame, maybe, or just fear of what I might do next. As soon as Tyler left for school, I turned to her. "We're not done," I said firmly. Rachel sighed, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. "I figured as much." "Who is he, Rachel? How long has this been going on?" I demanded. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "His name is Brad," she said softly. "We met a few months ago. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious." "Not supposed to be serious?" I laughed bitterly. "So what, Rachel? Was it just fun? Just a way to pass the time while I was out working to keep this family afloat?" Her face flushed with anger. "Don't make this all about you, Alex. I told you last night, I felt invisible for years. Brad, he noticed me. He made me feel alive again." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her shift the blame. "You think that justifies sneaking around behind my back? Lying to me, to our son? Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I swear, Alex. I was going to end it, but you didn't," I interrupted. "Instead, you let it continue. You brought him into our lives, into my life. And now what? What am I supposed to do with this, Rachel?" She didn't answer, and the silence hung heavy between us. The days that followed were a blur. Rachel moved into the guest room, and we barely spoke except about Tyler. I threw myself into work, using it as a distraction, but every time I came home, the weight of what had happened hit me all over again. Rachel seemed to be trying to make amends in her own way. Cooking dinner, helping Tyler with his homework, keeping the house spotless, but it all felt hollow. She hadn't apologized, not really. And even if she had, I wasn't sure I could forgive her. One evening, as I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone, a notification popped up on Rachel's social media account. Out of curiosity, or maybe just masochism, I clicked on it. It was a photo from a few weeks ago, taken at what looked like a rooftop bar. Rachel was laughing, her hair tousled by the wind, and Brad was sitting next to her, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. The caption read, "Making memories with someone who truly understands me." My blood ran cold. I stared at the photo, my hands trembling with rage. This wasn't just a fling. This wasn't a mistake. She had been flaunting their relationship, treating it like some grand romance while I was at home with our son, oblivious to everything. I confronted her the moment she walked through the door. "How could you?" I shouted, holding up my phone. "Was humiliating me not enough? You had to make it public too?" Rachel's face turned pale. "Alex, don't," I snapped. "Don't try to justify this. You didn't care about me, about Tyler, about anything except yourself. You've been living a lie, Rachel, and now everyone knows it." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. This was the woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, and she had destroyed it all for some guy who couldn't even look me in the eye without smirking. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't know much about divorce, but I knew I needed to protect myself and Tyler. Rachel didn't protest when I told her. I think she knew this was inevitable, but what I didn't expect was Brad. A few days later, as I was leaving the office, He was waiting for me in the parking lot. He was wearing a sling, his arm still in a cast, but the smug grin on his face was as infuriating as ever. "You're a real piece of work, you know that?" he said as I approached my car. "Get out of my way, Brad," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Or what? You'll break my other arm?" he taunted. "Go ahead. Might make Rachel pity me even more." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to wipe that smirk off his face. "What do you want?" He leaned against my car, his expression turning serious. "I just thought you should know, Rachel's not coming back to you. She's with me now, and we're going to make this work, no matter what you try to pull." "Is that supposed to scare me?" I asked. "Because all it does is make me pity you. You can have her, Brad. But don't think for a second that you're going to replace me in Tyler's life." His grin faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "We'll see about that," he said before walking away. I watched him leave, my mind racing. This wasn't just about me and Rachel anymore. This was about my son, my future, and what kind of life we were going to have moving forward. And I wasn't about to let Brad, or anyone else, take that away from me. Brad's words stayed with me for days. The idea that he might try to insinuate himself into Tyler's life filled me with a rage I could barely contain. He was already taking Rachel, already tearing apart the family I'd spent years building. But Tyler? Tyler was mine. No one was going to come between me and my son. Rachel, meanwhile, seemed to have retreated into herself. She wasn't her usual confident, sharp-tongued self. I could tell she was trying to gauge my next move. Every time we crossed paths in the house, she looked like she wanted to say something, but the words never came. Then, one evening, as I was finishing up some paperwork at the dining table, she finally spoke. "Alex, we need to talk about Tyler." I looked up at her, trying to keep my voice calm. "What about him?" She shifted nervously. "I don't want him to get hurt in all of this. We need to figure out a way to co-parent, to make this transition as smooth as possible." "Co-parent?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "You mean you want to figure out how to integrate Brad into his life, don't you?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "No, that's not what I meant." "Don't lie to me, Rachel," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I know what this is. You're already planning to bring him around, aren't you? You want my son to call him stepdad, while I'm just supposed to sit back and let it happen?" "That's not fair," she shot back. "Brad isn't trying to replace you, Alex. He just wants to be a part of my life, and eventually, yes, Tyler's life too. But that doesn't mean he's taking your place." I stood up, slamming my hand on the table. "He doesn't get a place in Tyler's life, Rachel. Not now, not ever. You made your choice, but I'm not letting you or him drag my son into this mess." Her face hardened. "You don't get to make that decision on your own. Tyler is our son, Alex. And whether you like it or not, Brad is part of my life now." I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my anger. "You're right about one thing, Rachel. Tyler is our son, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he's not caught up in your poor decisions. You want to be with Brad? Fine. But don't expect me to stand by while you let him near my son." She didn't respond, and I walked out of the room before I said something I'd regret. A few days later, I had my first meeting with the lawyer I'd hired. Her name was Jessica Martinez, and she didn't pull any punches. "Alex, I'm going to be honest with you," she said as we sat in her office. "Divorce cases like this can get messy, especially when children are involved. If your wife wants to introduce her new partner into Tyler's life, there's not much we can do to stop her unless we can prove he's a danger to your son." I clenched my fists. "So what are you saying? I just have to let this happen?" Jessica shook her head. "Not necessarily. You're a good father, Alex. You've been the primary breadwinner, you've been present in Tyler's life, and from what you've told me, Rachel's actions have already caused significant disruption to your family dynamic. If we can demonstrate that her choices are not in Tyler's best interest, we can push for primary custody." Primary custody? The idea hadn't even occurred to me before. Tyler was my world, but the thought of taking him away from Rachel entirely felt wrong. Jessica must have seen the conflict on my face. "Look, this isn't about punishing her. It's about protecting your son. If you truly believe that Rachel's relationship with this man is harmful or unstable, then it's your responsibility to do what's best for Tyler. But you need to be sure, Alex. Courts don't take kindly to parents using custody as a weapon. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. I'll think about it, I said. When I got home that evening, Rachel was waiting for me in the living room. She looked tense, like she was bracing for another argument. Alex, we need to set some boundaries, she said as soon as I walked in. Boundaries? I repeated, dropping my bag on the floor. Funny, coming from someone who didn't respect the boundaries of our marriage. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait. I'm serious. This tension between us, it's not good for Tyler. We need to figure out how to move forward. I crossed my arms. Moving forward is easy. You move out, and we split custody. End of story. She flinched, but her expression quickly turned defiant. I'm not leaving, Alex. This is my home too. Not anymore, I said coldly. You gave that up the moment you decided to bring Brad into our lives. She stared at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Do you really hate me that much? I hesitated, caught off guard by the raw emotion in her voice. I don't hate you, Rachel. I hate what you've done. And I hate that Tyler is going to have to pay the price for your mistakes. She didn't respond, and I walked past her, feeling more exhausted than I had in weeks. The next morning, I got a call from Tyler's school. The principal wanted to meet with me and Rachel to discuss something concerning. My heart sank. When we arrived, the principal, Mrs. Callahan, ushered us into her office. Tyler was sitting on a small chair in the corner, looking miserable. What's going on? I asked, my voice tight with worry. Mrs. Callahan sighed. It seems there was an incident at recess. Tyler got into a fight with another student. What? Rachel exclaimed. Tyler's never been in a fight before. Mrs. Callahan nodded. That's why this is so surprising. From what we've gathered, another boy made a comment about your family situation, and Tyler, well, he reacted. I felt a lump form in my throat. What kind of comment? She hesitated. The boy said something about Tyler's parents splitting up and his mom having a new boyfriend. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. I clenched my fists, anger and guilt warring inside me. Tyler's been under a lot of stress lately, I said, my voice strained. We're going through a difficult time at home. Mrs. Callahan nodded sympathetically. I understand that, Mr. Davis, but we need to find a way to support Tyler through this. He's clearly struggling, and he needs stability. I glanced at Rachel, who was staring at the floor. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor. She looked broken, like she finally realized the impact her actions were having, not just on me, but on our son. As we left the school, Rachel turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex, we need to fix this. For Tyler's sake. I didn't respond, because deep down, I wasn't sure if it was even possible. Rachel's words from the school echoed in my mind as I drove home. We need to fix this. For Tyler's sake. For a moment, I almost believed she meant it. But the reality was clear. Things between us were broken beyond repair. Still, Tyler deserved better than what we were giving him. Cold silences, tense exchanges, and the constant presence of a looming fight. That night, after putting Tyler to bed, I sat in the living room with a beer in hand, staring at the wall. Rachel appeared in the doorway, hesitant, holding a cup of tea. Can I sit? She asked softly. I gestured to the chair opposite me without a word. She sat down, cradling her tea like it was the only thing keeping her steady. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, she said after a long pause. I looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. You didn't mean for what? The affair? The lies? Or the fact that our son got into a fight because of what you did? Her face crumpled, but I didn't let up. Rachel, I don't even know who you are anymore. The woman I married wouldn't have done this. The mother of my child wouldn't have dragged him into this mess. She wiped a tear away, her hands trembling. I'm sorry, Alex. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I was selfish. I was lost, and I let it get out of control. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still clung to the memories of who she used to be, of the life we had before everything fell apart. But another part of me, the part that saw Brad's smug face and heard Tyler's principal talk about the fight, knew that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, if at all. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't know if I even want to try." She nodded, her shoulders sagging. "I understand. But Tyler, he needs both of us. We have to figure out a way to do this without hurting him more than we already have." For once, I agreed with her. Whatever happened between us, Tyler had to come first. The next day, I called Jessica, my lawyer, and told her I wanted to move forward with filing for primary custody. Rachel had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Jessica was supportive, but cautious. "Alex, if this goes to court, it could get ugly. Are you ready for that?" "Ugly is already my life right now," I replied. "I just want to make sure Tyler is okay. That's all that matters." Rachel wasn't surprised when I told her. If anything, she seemed resigned to the idea. "I'll fight for him, Alex," she said quietly, "but I won't tear you down in the process. Tyler deserves better than that." It was the first time in weeks that I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with, but it didn't change anything. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Brad inserted himself into the situation again. I came home one evening to find him standing on my porch, his arm still in a sling but his smirk as infuriating as ever. "What the hell are you doing here?" I barked, stepping out of my car and slamming the door shut. "Relax, Alex," he said, holding up his free hand. "I'm here to talk." "We've got nothing to talk about," I snapped. "Actually, we do," he replied, leaning casually against the porch railing. "Rachel told me about the custody thing. I just wanted to let you know that I'll be there for her, no matter what." I felt my blood boil. "This isn't about you, Brad. It's about my son. Stay out of it." He smirked. "That's the thing, Alex. If Rachel and I are going to be together, then Tyler's going to be part of my life too. You might as well get used to it." I took a step toward him, my fists clenched. "You'll never be part of his life. Ever. Stay away from my son, or I swear." "Or what?" he interrupted, his tone mocking. "You'll break my other arm?" I stared at him, my vision narrowing with rage. But I forced myself to take a step back. Brad wasn't worth it. He was baiting me, and I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "You've already taken enough from me," I said through gritted teeth. "You're not taking him too." He shrugged, his smug grin never faltering. "We'll see about that." As he walked away, I realized that this fight wasn't just about custody or Rachel's betrayal anymore. Brad was making it personal, and I wasn't going to back down. A few days later, I picked Tyler up from school. He was quiet on the drive home, staring out the window with a frown on his face. "Everything okay, buddy?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He shrugged. "Some kids were talking about you and Mom." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What did they say?" He hesitated, then mumbled, "That you're mad at Mom because of her boyfriend. Is that true?" I pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face him. "Tyler, listen to me. What's happening between me and Mom is really complicated. But none of it is your fault, okay? And I'm always going to be here for you, no matter what." He nodded, but his eyes were filled with confusion and hurt. "Why can't we just be a family again?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to tell him everything, to make him understand why things were the way they were. But he was only 8. He didn't need the weight of this on his shoulders. "I wish I could explain it better, champ," I said, my voice breaking. "But sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. And when that happens, we have to figure out a new way to be a family." He didn't say anything else, and the rest of the drive home was painfully silent. That night, after Tyler went to bed, Rachel came into the living room. She looked tired, like the weight of everything was finally catching up to her. "We need to talk," she said. I sighed. "I'm not in the mood for another fight, Rachel." "It's not a fight," she said, sitting down across from me. I need to say something." I waited, unsure of what was coming. I know I've hurt you, she began, her voice trembling. And I know I've destroyed the trust between us. But I'm trying, Alex. I'm trying to be a better person, for Tyler's sake. And for what it's worth. I'm sorry. For everything. Her words caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe her, but the scars of her betrayal were still fresh. I don't know if I can forgive you, Rachel, I said honestly, but I'll always put Tyler first. If you're serious about doing the same, then maybe we can find a way to make this work for him. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. That's all I want. For the first time in weeks, it felt like there might be a glimmer of hope. Just when things seemed to be settling, my phone rang late one night. It was Jessica, my lawyer. Alex, we've got a problem, she said. What kind of problem? I asked, my heart sinking. Brad's filed a petition to be recognized as a potential stepfather in the custody arrangement. He's claiming that he has a right to be involved in Tyler's life because of his relationship with Rachel. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. He can't do that, can he? It's a long shot, Jessica admitted, but it complicates things. We need to act fast. As I hung up, I realized that this fight was far from over. The days following Jessica's call were some of the most stressful of my life. I couldn't believe Brad had the audacity to try and worm his way into my son's life through legal channels. It felt like a direct attack, not just on me as a father, but on my very identity. Tyler was my everything, the one thing I'd fight for no matter what. And now, it seemed like Brad was determined to take even that away from me. Rachel, to her credit, seemed as shocked by Brad's move as I was. I had no idea he was planning this, she said one night, sitting across from me at the dining table. Her voice was small, almost pleading. How could you not know? I shot back, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. She shook her head. Alex, I swear, Brad and I haven't even talked about Tyler like that. I don't agree with what he's doing. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, then put a stop to it. Tell him to drop it. Make it clear that Tyler is off limits. Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she nodded. I'll talk to him. I don't want this to get any worse. I didn't say anything, but her words brought little comfort. I wasn't sure I trusted her anymore. Not with Tyler, not with anything. 2 days later, I got a text from Rachel. I talked to Brad. He's refusing to back down. I think you need to handle this. The rage that bubbled up inside me was almost uncontrollable. I couldn't believe this was happening. Brad had already taken so much from me, and now he was actively trying to rewrite my role in my son's life. I drove to his apartment that evening, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When I got there, he answered the door with that same smug grin that made my blood boil. Well, he said, leaning against the doorframe. If it isn't Alex, what brings you here? Let me guess, you're here to talk about Tyler. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glaring at him. This ends now, Brad. You're not going to win this. Tyler is my son, and you have no place in his life. Brad's grin faltered, but only slightly. You don't get it, do you? Rachel and I are building a life together. Whether you like it or not, that includes Tyler. No, I said, my voice low and firm. It doesn't. You think you can just waltz in here, take my wife, and replace me in my son's life? You're delusional. He shrugged, his cocky demeanor returning. We'll see what the court has to say about that. I took a step closer, my fists clenched at my sides. Stay out of this, Brad, for your own sake, because if you keep pushing, you're going to regret it. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a laugh. Is that a threat? No, I said, my voice cold. It's a promise. The next day, Jessica called me with surprising news. Brad's petition has been withdrawn, she said, sounding almost as shocked as I felt. What? Why? I asked, barely able to process her words. Apparently, Rachel intervened. She filed a statement making it clear that Brad has no claim to any parental rights and that she doesn't support his involvement in Tyler's life beyond being her partner. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of relief. Rachel had done the right thing, finally. Maybe she realized just how much damage Brad was causing. Not just to me, but to Tyler as well. That evening, Rachel approached me while I was sitting in the backyard, watching Tyler play with his toy trucks. "I told Brad to back off," she said quietly, sitting down next to me. "I heard," I replied, keeping my eyes on Tyler. She hesitated. "I'm sorry, Alex, for everything. I know I can't undo the damage I've done, but I want you to know that I'm not going to let Brad hurt Tyler. Whatever happens between us, I'll put him first. Always." I looked at her, searching her face for any sign of deception, but for the first time in weeks, she looked genuine. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But this doesn't change what you've done, Rachel. We'll figure out how to co-parent, but that's as far as it goes." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, custody agreements, and trying to find a new normal for Tyler. Rachel moved into a small apartment nearby, and we worked out a schedule that allowed both of us to spend time with him. Brad, thankfully, stayed out of the picture. Whether it was Rachel's influence or my warning, I didn't know, and I didn't care. As long as he was gone, I could focus on rebuilding my life. One evening, as I tucked Tyler into bed, he looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. "Are you and Mom ever going to live together again?" My heart ached at the question, but I forced myself to smile. "No, buddy. But that doesn't mean we don't both love you more than anything in the world." He nodded, seeming to accept my answer. "Okay. I love you, Dad." "I love you too, champ," I said, kissing his forehead. As I left his room, I realized that while my marriage was over, my life wasn't. I still had Tyler, and I still had a future to build. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Months passed, and the pain of Rachel's betrayal began to fade. I focused on my career, on being the best father I could be, and on finding a sense of peace. Rachel and I managed to maintain a civil relationship for Tyler's sake, and while I would never forget what she'd done, I no longer felt consumed by anger. One afternoon, as I was picking Tyler up from Rachel's apartment, she stopped me at the door. "Alex," she said, her voice hesitant, "I just want you to know, I'll always regret what I did to us. You didn't deserve that." I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of calm. "Thank you, Rachel. I hope you find what you're looking for." And with that, I walked away, finally ready to close that chapter of my life for good.